For over 30 years, Dr. Ravi Zacharias has been a gift to the kingdom of God. He has, in recent years, been expanding his influence with a diverse team of bright young men and women who are just the best at defending the Christian faith. And we have had the pleasure this week of having the Canadian director of Ravi Zacharias International Ministries with us to tackle some burning questions, at least to probe them a little bit. Dr. Andy Bannister is a lead apologist as well, and a mild-mannered man. For a person who is willing to enter the fray, all over the world, you found people who don't believe as you believe, and you graciously gave them the opportunity to say so.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're excited about in this documentary, Burning Questions, that we've put together, Moira, has been exactly that opportunity to interview those who sometimes, in some cases, disagree profoundly with what you and I would believe as Christians. I mean, to give one example, one of the main atheist voices on there, we've seen him a couple of times this week. His name was Peter Atkins from Oxford University.
Yes.
I mean, he was phenomenal. I mean, he gave us 3 hours of his time, busy man, invited us into his Oxford flat. His wife served us tea and cake, and then he and I proceeded to disagree about almost everything.
And you must have just been busting to kind of
You do sort of sit there
back.
wanting to kind of leap back and go, but your job as the interviewer is to try and bring them out of themselves. But what I hope it means is that when viewers watch that documentary, and you can see clips at burningquestions.ca, when you watch clips from the documentary, watch the whole thing, the atheist voice is represented, the Muslim voice is represented. We want to make sure that people don't come away feeling, well, this was a setup.
You're so fair.
Softballs. We try to be fair.
You're just so fair.
We do our best.
Now, could this be God incidence? Yes. The problem of evil, our focus today, and on every newspaper around the globe today, will be these first strikes on the Islamic State. This rather groundbreaking coalition, 5 Arab nations standing with the U.S. against this terrorist group. Someone said today, it's not a terrorist group, it's a fluid army, and a very scary one. You have 11 years of study on the Islamic religion, and that's what your doctorate is in. You must be loaded for bear on what is happening in our world.
Well, I mean, we could spend a whole kind of interview just talking about the Middle East, I guess. I mean, I think a couple of things I would say. One is that I think you only have to open the newspaper on a daily basis. Today it's the Islamic State. You know, tomorrow it'll be something else, and you see the problem of evil writ large. You know, we seem to live in a world in which there is evil and suffering and violence and pain and injustice. And of course, for many people, that raises a huge question. You know, Christians, we claim to believe in a God who is powerful, a God who is good. Well, what gives? I mean, what's going on? And then, of course, there's all the political questions that flow from the Middle East right now. You know, what do we do? And
evil on the loose.
Evil on the loose. And I think, you know, I think it was G.K. Chesterton, the famous kind of Victorian Christian writer, who once famously said that original sin is the one empirically verifiable Christian doctrine. I.e., if you don't believe that human beings have a problem with brokenness and sinfulness, just open your newspaper. You can verify that truth every day. And I think one of the big challenges, I think, for my atheist friends, and I pushed Peter Atkins on this when we spoke in Oxford. I asked him about evil and how as an atheist he defines that. And of course that becomes a huge question, really, because I think it's very problematic if you don't have some kind of belief in God to actually use words like good and evil. I think the best you can say is you can look at the Middle East and say, oh, well, I don't like it as an atheist, it offends me. But to actually take that step and say that it's wrong and that it's evil, to use the E word, my word, then you're into quite slippery territory.
Yeah, a moral standard has to come from something, somewhere.
Well, it does. If the moral standard just comes from you or I, at the end of the day, you know, you decide that you like your iPhone. I decide that I like your iPhone, and I'm going to reach over and steal it. Well, who wins at the end of the day? Whose preference weighs out? Well, I guess at that stage you might appeal upwards to the state. You'd say, well, if you steal my phone, Andy, I'll call the police. Well, all you're doing is appealing to the bully, and well, who wins? I mean, after all, in this country, property is, you know, taking property is theft, but other countries have a different system of law. Maybe the Islamic State, if they get big enough, they get to decide what the rules are. And in other words, if there isn't some transcendent source of good and evil, bigger than you and I, bigger than countries even, bigger than ideologies and human constructions, really it seems very hard to answer the question of how we can even use terms like good and evil in the first place.
Let me just throw something out here. I have a friend,
Throw away.
a young woman who is a professor at a university pursuing doctoral studies.
Yeah.
Recently felt led to move into an arena where she can teach from a Christ-centered worldview.
Okay.
The woman supervising her doctorate, not impressed. And she's been encouraged recently in discovering a fellow professor who, in a rather clandestine way, really kind of covertly outed the fact that he's a believer too. Now, what is this with academia that, I mean, what do they do with C.S. Lewis, who is so respected, so brilliant, and loved Jesus?
Yeah, a couple of things going on there. One is that there's a sense, not on all, I think it would be unfair to say that it's every university campus, but certainly some, where I think there's sort of such a sense of oppression that if you stand up and take any spiritual position, certainly a Christian one, that the doors close, opportunities are slammed shut, and that you can face all kinds of difficulties in your career, and that leads many academics to perhaps feel that they can't profess their Christian faith, which is, for me, is tragic, because the university should be a place where every opinion, every belief is welcome at the table, and that means as a Christian I'm going to encounter views I disagree with, that's fine, but then so should my atheist friends, and then we talk about them, we wrestle them out, and students particularly have an opportunity to try different ideas out and worldviews out and decide what truth is. That's what the university was designed to be. So the very fact that a Christian professor can feel not safe doing that tells me that university is failing in their fundamental mandate. But the C.S. Lewis example, particularly around this topic, Moira, of suffering and evil, is a really good one.
He wrote The Problem of Pain.
That's right. Well, he wrote 2 books on evil, Problem of Pain and A Grief Observed. But what was interesting, many people don't know that Lewis was an atheist for 30 years. And what kept him from God as a young man was the problem of evil.
What a handsome young man he was.
He was as a young guy, absolutely.
And, but he was wounded.
Yeah, so basically he lost his mother when he was a young boy. Then he went off and fought in the trenches of World War I as an 18 and 19-year-old, and like many of his generation just saw this brutally violent conflict with huge loss of life for really no end. And then concluded, faced with that God didn't exist. Comes back, goes to Oxford University, launches onto an academic career, and then does what I think many atheists, with all due respect, often fail to do. He had the courage to begin asking if his atheism was actually true. Many stop at that point. He was willing to subject his atheist beliefs to the same scrutiny he'd subjected his former Christian beliefs to, that he'd been raised in. And he very quickly discovered that the wheels came off, particularly around evil, because he very quickly realized that if there was no God, he had no right to use the term good and evil anyway. Lewis famously said, you know, you can't speak of a crooked line unless you first know what a straight line is. So where, he said, was I getting this definition of good and evil from? And that was just one question that he began asking. And as he explored those, it led him over a period of some years, it took him some time to journey back to Christian faith and embrace it wholeheartedly.
And God healed his heart, and look what he gave us.
It's astonishing what God has done through C.S. Lewis.
Well, we'll let some other people weigh in for a moment or two, shall we? Andy?
Yeah, so we're going to watch a clip, I think, from Burning Questions. BurningQuestions.ca is the website, and yeah.
The Problem of Evil. Let's take a listen.
I believe every single worldview has to come to this question of suffering and pain by answering 3 questions. Why has this suffering happened? Where is God at? Or is there anyone that can save me if a worldview doesn't believe in God? And how does this answer alleviate my pain?
So does Christianity have answers to question? Yes. Is it a cure-all? Not at all. Do we have a sufficient answer, one that works? Yes. But do Christians get sick, have suffering, and have pain, and have sorrow? Yes. Do they have answers? Yes. Sometimes is there deliverance in the midst of it? Yes. And sometimes no. Here, you know, God answers prayer. I believe in prayer, but you and I well know that God sometimes says yes, sometimes he says no, sometimes he says wait. And the last 2 of those are a problem for many Christians.
God looks at the mess that we make of life, because we all make choices that don't include love. We all make choices that don't include him, which is all goodness, all peace, all light. And so we've created, in a sense, throughout history, the mess that we are in.
Now, the problem of natural evil, about the earthquakes and the sinking of the Titanic and the tornadoes and so on, in biblical terms, I think, has to go back to the fall and the fact that when our first parents rebelled against God, then this world fell under a curse. And this world doesn't work the way it did originally.
I think God took an enormous risk by making a universe in which goodness and love were possibilities, giving the freedom of it, and knowing indeed that humans would then Some of them take that freedom, plunges into a catastrophe, but that he himself was willing, even with that risk, to step into the equation, himself die and suffer.
From my understanding, this is a unique claim of Christianity, that Jesus Christ himself, God incarnate, should experience weakness and suffering. For many religious people, that part of the Christian story is dismissed as blasphemy. They don't like to hear that part of the story. And yet it's the fundamental part of the story, common to all the Gospels, that Jesus Christ is the suffering God, the God who so identified with us in our pain that he went through the cross for you and I.
Jesus wept, it says in the Bible, when suffering touched his friends. But Jesus didn't just stop with suffering alongside of us and having an emotional response. He then decides to suffer in the greatest way by going to the cross, by sacrificing his life and saying, I will create a solution, a way out, a way that pays for our forgiveness back to the God that you originally pushed away, back to the heart of the Father that created this good world, this world of peace that us, in wanting our own way, destroyed.
Just a sample response to probably the biggest barrier to God, the problem of evil, Andy. People are going to want to get in discussion on this.
I think so, and I think one of the things we've said throughout the week, actually, there's a study guide on the Burning Questions website, burningquestions.ca, which allows churches and small groups to dig into it. But you're right, for many people, I think what keeps them from God are not the kind of highfalutin philosophical questions, God and science and the such like, but the problem of evil. And I think one of the things that I love where Michelle landed that was that for everything else you might say, Christianity is unique in this regard. It says not what God, so much what God has said about evil. The Bible doesn't give us a philosophical answer to the question, but it says what God has done about evil, because Christianity has suffering at the very heart of it, because at the cross, Jesus took on suffering personally and dealt with it. So yes, there may be questions when you or I experience suffering, but the God who we follow, the God of the Bible, is a God who knows what suffering means and can walk with us in it. Doesn't answer every question, but it is the beginning of an answer.
And tomorrow, the mantra, there are many paths to God. We'll be looking at pluralism. But just on your point here, Andy, I was in Bible school in England in 1981 with two beautiful girls, Leah and Abrahet from Eritrea. Their brothers were at war with Ethiopia. They said they would have rifles over their shoulder if they hadn't had the privilege of coming to Bible school. And they taught me a word, ajoha. This is what you would say to soldiers heading into war. Have hope. Victory is yours. Continue forward. This is not the end place. In a culture increasingly fearful because of all that's happening in the world, that is our eternal hope in Christ.